Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the first episode of the story where Madara devised a plan. The Yondaime ruined things. Madara devised another plan. One that could never fail. But even the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and this one had just run into Konoha's most surprising ninja, Uzumaki Naruto. This story is from Arun 2110. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. The man with the spiky hair and the one-eyed mask paced before his associates with his hands clasped behind his back. His three colleagues in the room formed the inner circle of their organization and he'd called them together to discuss strategy. As things stood, their original plans could not be executed and they needed a new one. The mask wearer himself was angry, for his plans for accursed Konoha had been stymied. Yet again. Like his predecessor/successor before him, depending on how you looked at things, that insignificant worm Sarutobi had thrown a monkey wrench in his plans 3 years back during the Sound Sand raid on Konoha. Since then, Leaf had turned the entire Shinobi world on its head and its retired Hokage had disappeared the one-tailed demon off the face of the earth. The tailed beasts needed to be sealed in a specific order and breaking the sequence would result in disaster. And for 3 long years, the Akatsuki had searched for the demon's whereabouts in vain only to come up empty-handed. "This is intolerable," the man growled, stopping in the middle of the room and turning to face his friends. "Please, Madara, calm yourself," the lone woman in the group said. "Calm?" Madara spat the word aloud. "Conan, perhaps you've forgotten this little fact, but the purpose of Akatsuki is to capture the tailed beasts. Our long-term goals are contingent on our ability to execute that part of the plan successfully. And yet, here we stand, 3 years into the investigation to uncover the Shikaku and we still don't know where Monkey Brains hid it." The man in white and black with the Venus flytrap on his shoulders nodded. "Granted, our efforts so far have failed, but that's only because everyone who knows the secret of the One Tail are high-visibility targets in the highest echelons of power in Leaf and Fire and we couldn't touch them without setting alarm bells off across the elemental countries. But, Madara, war is afoot again and the time is nearly upon us when we needn't be so circumspect about our actions and their ramifications. Pretty soon, we'll send for Sarutobi and get the measure of the man." The man stepped 2 paces closer to his seated conspirators and subordinates. "Konoha's been victorious in every war fought since its foundation." Conan nodded. "Perhaps, but this one is different. They had allies to help them and numerous legends in their ranks before. What they have today are a bunch of has-beens who are too old to take the field anymore. Legends are forged in the heat of battle. Let's not forget that," Madara reminded her. "They are beset from 3 directions at once," Conan retorted. "Perhaps. But we will not underestimate Konoha like so many have to their detriment before. Leaf has a way of throwing surprises as I can well attest." The others remained silent. Shinobi legends and bogeymen made the rank and file of Akatsuki, but Madara was a monster even by those standards. Any man who survived a fight with the yellow flash unscathed was. "Pain, when the time comes to fetch Sarutobi, you will handle it personally. I'm not ready to trust anyone else with a task of this magnitude." The man who'd remained quiet until then nodded. "It'll be done once the war starts." "Good." XXXX Brigadier Mamoru, the commander of the fire garrison guarding the main highway to Grass Country, dismissed the ninja messenger. Then he wound the communique that the recently departed shinobi had delivered and slapped it against his left palm thoughtfully. He did not think for more than a minute. "Ray," he addressed his aide, "please summon the staff for a meeting." Ray acknowledged the order and retired to carry it out. The brigadier fetched himself a cup of herbal tea and sat down, scratching his chin. Wind had found allies and was maneuvering for war with Hai no Kuni. Fire was truly caught with their pants down with their betrayal and now, the country was scampering to mobilize for war that was in all probability only a few weeks away. And if Cloud was involved, then his brigade was looking at some very interesting times ahead. XXXX General Sarutobi Hiruzen looked at the missive hand-delivered by messenger summon only a few minutes back. Fire's enemies had managed to hoodwink Hi-no Kuni's intelligence apparatus rather well and hidden their preparations for war until it was almost too late to react, but he wasn't surprised too much. Fire and Leaf alone did not have a monopoly on competent people, after all. Sarutobi reflected that it was a good thing that Fire had been preparing for a hot war in the near future as well, because it was clear from the evidence at hand that they were about to be hammered by their enemies, probably from multiple axes at once. He was confident of Fire's chances in the long run, but he had his doubts about the first few months. The first blows were going to be the hardest because not only were they going to have to fight on multiple fronts, but they'd have to do it while being outnumbered as well. Hopefully, Hi-no Kuni's preparations were enough to weather the initial onslaught. In Fire's favor, they had a good blue water navy, thanks to the conquest of tea, to defend their shipping, and they were blessed with internal lines of communication and excellent logistics. It'd be a simple thing to use their navy to threaten the enemy's seaborne merchant traffic and to blockade their ports. Plus, there was the new unit that Konoha had secretly built over the last 3 years. And there were the new volunteer formations raised by the daimyo to consider. Sarutobi picked up his quill. The insurgency in Tea was in its last gasps and no longer needed as many nin to fight as had been the case earlier, and he knew just the right unit to send to reinforce Konoha's frontline units. XXXX Everyone knew the old man raised pigeons as a hobby. He lived by himself, and sold cheap breakfast and lunch to laborers who worked on the rice fields. On the side, he delivered pigs to the nearby grass country garrison's quartermaster once a week. He etched a meager living, but he was amiable and possessed a generous heart. He'd moved into the area only a decade back, but he'd helped so many people and made so many friends that he was accepted as a part of the community. No one suspected him of being a spy, and certainly, no one kept tabs on him. In truth, the old man was a sleeper agent. Fire had planted him for the express purpose of watching the only road that was good enough for moving a sizable body of troops between Tsuchi no Kuni and Hai no Kuni through Kusa no Kuni. Grass had long been Fire's ally, but alliances had always been fluid things in the world of Shinobi, and as he watched 4 battalions of Earth infantry march by his home without being challenged by their grass counterparts, the old man thought to himself that it looked like this one had just about run its course. That afternoon, at the end of the lunch hour rush, the old man spent a few minutes chatting with his friends from the village. Then, he headed to the roof to tend to his pigeons. He picked a very special one, the one he'd bought off a merchant passing through the village and which he'd always kept locked in its cage, and after feeding the bird its best meal ever, released it from its cage. The feed was also its most expensive treat ever, as it contained 3 little pips of gold. Minutes later, the homing pigeon was on its way to Hai no Kuni. With Sunanin behind them and to either side, Teams 7 and 8 knowingly advanced towards another force of unknown strength that had a Jinchuriki in its ranks. The poor Sand Shinobi thought they had the intruders trapped, but Naruto knew the fools were seeing things ass backwards. He and his teammates were the hunters in this silly drama and not the hunted. The stupid Suna sods did not know it yet, but he had them right where he wanted. Hinata, report. Naruto barked as they crested a dune, and finally, the low hill that was their objective came into view. The position is undefended, the Byakugan user replied, briefly activating her far-seeing eyes. Enemy dispositions on the flanks and the rear remain the same relative to ours. There is no sign of the Jinchuriki as of yet on our van. Excellent work, Hinata, the blonde praised as they continued in the easy lopping jog they'd been using throughout the day up the hill. He turned to Kiba and Shino next. Do either of you sense anything that Hinata's missed? None at this time, Shino replied easily. Good, Sakura nodded. We will stick to the plan. Hinata, Shino and Kiba, you're our medical party, observer section and our operational reserve. Naruto, you're in charge of command and communication. You're also in charge of security in our rear and our flanks. Keep the Sunanin on our tail and our sides away from Sasuke and I at all cost. The two of us are responsible for the Jinchuriki, and that's going to be a bitch and a half by itself with us fresh and rested. Everyone repeated their tasking verbatim so that everyone's responsibility was clear. Once they reached the top of the hill, Naruto unsealed the huge canteens of water they'd appropriated from the overrun Suna observation post, as well as a tent and short-range encrypted radios for communication. Sasuke produced energy rations, and Hinata and Sakura distributed blood and chakra pills. Kiba tended to Akamaru, removing the dog's feather shoes for the first time in days, and Shino began mining the area with explosive tags on kunai. There were a great many of both, and his Kikai bugs would detonate the tags whenever someone other than his allies approached them. As Shino went about this business, Naruto used earth techniques to demolish boulders that obstructed the line of fire in a rough circle with a radius of several hundred yards from the top of the hill, while the others took care of nature. Finally, they raised a canopy to give them shade. Everything was set. Danzo glared balefully at the open expanse of wind country from his position atop the rampart of his little fort. He was angry because Kakashi's bastard children had gone missing and Ishimatsu had disappeared with them. The latter, he knew, was almost certainly one with his ancestors. The ex-route commander wasn't concerned about the fate of his subordinate, but he was worried that he wouldn't get his hands on the unnamed Jinchuriki. Any news from the hunters? He asked his aide, knowing the answer well. Kakashi couldn't be allowed to get his hands on yet another Jinchuriki. Nothing positive so far, Danzo-sama. They haven't made contact with the enemy still. Danzo nodded calmly, though he felt otherwise. The hunt for the Jinchuriki and its cohorts had been on for weeks now, and the results had been depressing. Hopefully, Kakashi's darlings would have the same trouble as his route. Let's get out of this heat. Events will unfold as they will, and there's precious little we can do from here. The day is young yet, and we have yet another meeting with that prick of a diplomat, what's his name, Koiso. I wonder what new threats the bastard will make today. I hate this fucking desert, the Kunoichi groused as she and her team jogged towards their destination. Her nearest companion, their Suna liaison, chuckled. Complaining doesn't suit you, Yujito, he replied, flashing her a smile. Some of us aren't attuned to this abominable desert heat, thank you, Yujito replied. Tell me again why the hell we are breaking up SEC by racing across the fucking desert in broad daylight with stealth thrown to the winds like this. A post close to Suna was overrun by an unknown force. The enemy massacred the unit sent to retake it before they retreated. The council thinks Danzo's involved, but even if he isn't, they want the belligerents killed as an abject lesson to San's enemies. Teams of Sunanin are herding the bastards towards us, and we're to execute them when they run into us. So why aren't we preparing an ambush? She asked. Because our opponents are powerful and this sandy expanse isn't good ground for a drawn-out battle. We'll be out of the dunes and into the Badlands 10 minutes from now, and there are plenty of spots there to set up a good ambush. And this powerful enemy is going to walk into a trap. Tell me, Kuribayashi, wouldn't the enemy know they're being herded in this direction for some reason? What if they do something else? Each of the herding parties is more than 50 members strong. The enemy has no choice but to run towards us, and we have you. Yes, we have me, she murmured with a frown in reply. She wasn't happy with the current situation at all. Her Suna compatriots seemed to think that just because she was a Jinchuriki, the outcome of any battle was written in stone. But she hosted only the two-tail, and if Konoha was involved somehow, and she thought Sans council was right on that point, then there were all those rumors of Konoha's nine-tailed Jinchuriki to worry about. Contact, Hinata announced brusquely. Two-man party of scouts at 6 o'clock. Naruto straightened in his seat, rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles. Well, it's time to rock and roll, he said cheekily, pulling a swig of water. Sit back and enjoy the show, guys. You're going to see something special. Kiba and Sasuke guffawed. Naruto grinned at the two and whispered a few instructions to one of his Kage Bunshin hinged as a pebble on the command desk and dismissed it. Well, shit, the Suna scout cursed aloud. Better call it in, Sukwon. We're going to have to dig these bastards out. Sukwon nodded, lowering his telescope. The gutsy fuckers were making themselves at home on top of the hill. They even had a motherfucking tent raised to give them shade. He bristled. The least the assholes could do was act like their lives were in peril, which from the pedestal and other assorted accoutrements under their canopy, they were not. Let's hope they don't see us before the main force arrives, he muttered back in reply, or we're all for it. Shit, Kuribayashi cursed and threw up his right hand in the air, signaling an impromptu halt. Problems? Yujito asked. Yeah, he nodded, drawing out a map and spreading it on the ground as the other members of the team gathered around him. The enemy has taken command of Tashinari Hill and is apparently enjoying a siesta. Yujito couldn't contain herself and burst into laughter. The Suna liaison glared at her. Well, fuck if that don't take the cake, she shot at him with a shake of her head. Then, in a serious tone, the enemy screws up your plans. That's why he is the enemy. Now, what are we going to do about it? We set up our ambush while the other teams dig them out. How far are we from this hill? And do we have a positive ID? Yujito asked. 30 minutes. Thereabouts. And no, they're wearing masks, though there's a dog in their little clique. That's another probable indicator that Konoha's involved. Then forget the ambush. Let the others try to dig them out. If they do, well and good. We'll catch the enemy in the open when he's tired, beaten and running for his life. If they don't, we'll hit them just as they and your teams are running out of steam. They'll be exhausted defending their position if they aren't overrun and we'll make short work of them. Kuribayashi looked at the others. They nodded. Sounds like a plan, he said, calling in their movement over the command channel. Well, look who's coming to the party, Naruto quipped jovially, standing up. The main body of one of the flanking teams had finally shown up. Its leaders were assembling the men in preparation for an assault on their hill. Ain't that cute? The blonde observed. There was only one area on that flank to assemble a reasonably large body men for an assault. He'd hoped that this particular group would show up first and prepared a surprise for them just in case. Naruto flashed through a bunch of hand seals and smiled at his friends. Bunshin Daibakuha is an unforgiving bitch, he stated aloud. The XO of the Suna group on the flank of the Konoha Nin was in the middle of issuing a command when the world went mad with explosions. Earth, chunks of flesh and sundry items tried to reach stable low Earth orbits as a piece of hell dawned on the badlands of Kaze no Kuni. As the explosions died and the debris rained down, 39 Suna Nin lay wounded and 17 lay dead. Miraculously, 3 shinobi escaped the Holocaust unscathed. They survived for 3 seconds before being skewered by Chidori wielding Kage Bunshin. The clones attacked from less than 20 yards, point-blank range for Chidori assassinations, and gave their victims no chance to defend themselves. The couple of walking wounded staggering around in disorientation and shell shock died in fiery explosions as more clones manifested themselves. Naruto was naturally inclined to execute the rest of the bastards as well, but with observers watching, he didn't want to expose Konoha to accusations of war crimes. Fuck, Sukwon cursed even as his teammate radioed in their comrade's fate to the other teams. He wasn't surprised that there were survivors of the initial attack, but he'd never seen so many people killed in such a short span in his decade-long experience as a ninja. You got that right. That was the Chidori, his partner stated. The technique put paid to the question of the identity of the foreign shinobi. No one outside Konoha knew it. Then, in an angrier voice, and those bastards are executing the wounded. Sukwon cast a glance at his partner. It was a de facto law of war that clones did not accept surrenders. Ever. Anyone unlucky enough to find themselves in such a circumstance with a clone were executed for their troubles. But the animosity and the hatred the majority of Suna shinobi held for their leaf counterparts had grown so much in the last 3 years that they were all too willing to believe the worst of the latter. The state of affairs wasn't entirely Suna's fault, with Danzo's men accounting for their fair share with their brutality. "I think it's that kid that did in Gaara during the Chunin exams 3 years back, Goro," he commented, hoping to derail his partner's rant. Goro got a thoughtful look on his face. Finally, he nodded in assent, his face pale. Only a few Suna survivors of that attack were ever repatriated back to Sand, but the stadium had been stacked full of civilians that day and they'd all talked about it. Hell, that one fight had done as much to enhance Konoha's reputation as their infamous victory over Orochimaru that they'd become the hidden village of choice for civilian business magnates who wanted a little wet work done on their behalf. "Shit, I think you're right. We'd better call this in. That bastard took out Gaara in one hit. I think we're about to get first-row seats on how powerful he's grown in the last 3 years." Sukwon nodded. The day just kept on getting better and better. "What's the matter?" Yujito asked, sidling up to Kuribayashi as the look on the liaison's face turned grim. "Just got word that one of the flanking teams got taken out." "How did that happen?" "I thought they had orders to wait until they could link up with the others before launching an attack. They walked into a trap. Apparently, the ground they were assembling on was a giant trap rigged with exploding clones." "Fuck. Any survivors?" Kuribayashi shook his head. Then he held up a finger in a gesture of silence and pressed the thumb of his other hand against his earplug to hear better. "We think we have a positive ID on at least one of the targets." "Shoot. You remember that Uzumaki boy who defeated the Yondaime Kazekage's youngest during the ill-fated Chunin exams 3 years back?" "That kid?" Yujito asked. "I'd always wondered if things happened as that legend goes. We have multiple first-hand accounts of that fight. And not just from fire civilians who were encouraged by Konoha to spread the story. The nobles were particularly enthusiastic in their descriptions. And yes, that kid. They've already sent someone back to Suna to report this news. He's probably with his teammates then." Kuribayashi nodded. "One of them is an Uchiha," he observed. "Then we really do have our task cut out for us. What are the other teams doing?" "They're linking up beyond line of sight and are going to attack en masse. Have them wait for our signal. We'll scrape the previous plan and hit the Leaf Ninja from their rear while they're defending themselves against the combined assault. We'll be there in 5 minutes," Kuribayashi barked into his microphone. "Execute." He nodded at his allies and continued at the present pace. There was no point in reaching the battlefield too early and out of breath. Such stupidity got your throat slit at the end of the day. Contact inbound from 5 o'clock. ETA 3 minutes. Strength upwards of 100, Hinata announced, downing a chakra pill to restore her reserves. "Looks like this is the big one," Sakura muttered, sliding out of her seat. Kiba had been tracking the scent of the Jinchuriki for close to 5 minutes now. It did not take a genius to figure out that their enemies planned to stagger their attacks so as to hit the Leaf Ninja from the rear while the latter were decisively engaged defending their position from the assaulting Sand Shinobi. Naruto grunted and murmured another set of commands to a Kage Bunshin disguised as yet another pebble before dismissing it. Then, he turned to his teammates. "You know your responsibilities. Try to stay alive." "To victory," Sasuke enthused. "An excellent booty thereafter," Kiba appended. Akamaru barked in agreement. Everyone smiled at the Inazuka Scion's words. Naruto met their eyes and nodded. "Let's do this." Sukwon heard the order for general assault on his earplug and heaved a small sigh of relief. He and Goro'd managed to avoid detection so far, which meant they'd probably live to see sunset today. "About time," Goro whispered. He was glad to hear the news as well. Anyone powerful enough to take out that demon Gaara when they were still only 12 years old wasn't someone he ever wanted to tangle with. Ever. Yeah, a youngish voice assented from their rear. This infernal desert heat is unbelievable. Goro jumped to the side as the threat registered, but Sukwon was already dead with a kunai through the back of his skull. Grateful to have evaded the killing strike aimed at his neck, he cursed his misfortune at being forced to take on the Konoha Nin without support. "And what are you trying to do?" his opponent asked, eyeing the ninjato in Goro's hand speculatively. Goro opened his mouth to retort and sprayed blood. The chirping of birds filled the air all of a sudden, and his last thoughts were to curse himself for forgetting to account for the fact that his enemy was a master of Kage Bunshin. The charging Suna Nin crested the last dune 500 meters from Naruto's hill in a straight line, making liberal use of smoke bombs to hide their approach. But smoke was no hindrance to a Byakugan user, and Hinata rattled off their dispositions in a monotone voice. The first wave consisted of about 15 teams of 2 shinobi working together with good separation between the teams. The equally strong second wave trailed the first by 60 yards. The rest of the Sand Nin were nowhere in sight. Naruto nodded at the sight. There was no point in throwing 100 Nin at 6 targets. Better to overwhelm them in waves using your numerical advantage ruthlessly. Kiba whistled as Naruto drew a massive dose of the Kyuubi's chakra and formed 2 clones. At Kiba's signal, a line of Kage Bunshin 200 yards from the charging Sand Shinobi dropped their henge and, in a pitiful demonstration of their lack of skill in archery, shot a staggered bunch of arrows aimed at the first wave into the air. The first wave of the Suna Nin sped up to get under the flight of arrows, and the second wave slowed down just a mite for the same reason. While the attention of the Suna Nin were focused on the arrows, Naruto held his hand in front of him and formed a Rasengan. He pumped all the chakra he'd borrowed from the Kyuubi while his clones manipulated the swirling ball, adding fire and wind elements directed inwards to it. He'd practiced this technique plenty of times at the Frog Mountain that it took only 6 seconds to push the massive quantity of chakra into the sphere. It took another second to exercise the control needed to shrink the ball, and then he shot it at his enemies. Chakra-sensitive Nin among the Sand Shinobi had already sensed the massive amount of chakra being gathered on the top of the hill and began to increase their separation. Whoever was manipulating the chakra wouldn't have more than a single chance to use such a powerful technique, and while none of them had the chakra to block it, they meant to do everything in their power to reduce the casualties it'd inflict on them. Problem was, Naruto's attack wasn't directed at their ranks. It shot over their heads almost faster than their eyes could track and hit the sand dune behind which lay hidden the rest of the Suna Nin. The blast was a flesh-searing pulse of heat that vaporized several dozen tons of desert sand. It was powerful enough to destroy the top half of the sand dune and knocked the 7 members of the second wave closest to it senseless. A dozen more were thrown forcefully against the ground. As the resultant mushroom cloud rose into the air and debris rained in a rough ovoid 1,000 yards long along its semi-major axis, 67 Suna Nin who'd lain in wait behind the sand dune lay dead or dying. Many were torn to bits and burned to a crisp by hypersonic sand and plasma, but most were knocked senseless and buried, smothering to death under tons of sand with no hope of escape or rescue. The crack of explosion was the loudest noise the survivors had ever heard, and the survivors of the reserve force were pounded hard enough that many of them were going to be worthless for the remainder of that battle. "What the fuck was that?" Kuribayashi shouted as the loud crack of a distant explosion rang through the air. He looked at the sky in time to see a mushroom cloud scale the sparse clouds above. Yujito stared at the cloud and whistled appreciatively. Whoever was behind that explosion had just expended a shitload of chakra on one massive attack that equaled the best the Nikomata could throw. It was probably that Uzumaki brat, and hopefully, he'd shot his wad off with that stunt. "I'm unable to get through to anyone on the command channel. I'm going to try the squad communications channel now," the Suna liaison announced. "Sounds as if those bastards stuck their dicks into a meat grinder." "Damn, this sucks," one of the others commented. Yujito did not reply. She was a past master at big explosions, and if that Uzumaki brat thought he was the biggest fish in the pond, she meant to teach him better. The second flight of arrows was in mid-air when the blast wave hit them. 130 of the roughly 200 Kage Bunshin disguised as arrows botted in the fiery cataclysm, and 30 more were wounded. The injured clones dismissed themselves, and the survivors transformed back to their real selves and hit the ground rolling. The members of the first flight who were battle-worthy joined them. Simultaneously, the wannabe archers dropped their bows, which were transformed Kage Bunshin as well, and launched a straight-up mass charge at high speed. Disoriented by the explosion and beset from the front and their rear or flanks by ninjato-wielding suicidal clones, a dozen Suna Nin went down under the press. 10 more stayed behind to engage the clones, and the 20-odd shinobi that broke through the wave of Kage Bunshin charged up the hill. They were all that survived of the two waves. Some clones acting on their own initiative had already executed the Suna Nin and knocked flat by the explosion, while others mounted that reckless countercharge at the sand shinobi. The surviving assault force maintained fairly reasonable order for an unit that had experienced the kind of casualties they had. They were less than steady at this point, but were motivated by hatred for Konoha and knew that all they had to do was hold their enemy's attention for a couple of minutes before their relieving force hit the lead ninja from the rear. But there was a problem. To cross the remaining 200 yards of open land that stood between them and their objective at the top of the hill, they had to cover the impromptu mine field that Shino had rigged with exploding seals. And Shino's Kikai bugs were like bees in the manner they thought nothing of sacrificing their lives to protect the hive being Shino, his clan, and finally Konoha in this case. A dozen explosions rocked the air within the space of 3 seconds. Only 2 Suna Nin were hurt and killed by the blasts, but this was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. The Suna survivors had seen 70% of their strength reduced to well-cooked morsels, witnessed more of their number by the farm under a mass wave of suicidal clones, and seen 10 of their comrades throw away their lives as a sacrificial rearguard so that the remainder could fulfill the mission. Well, their mission was to hold the attention of the Konoha Nin on the top of the hill so that the composite team of their compatriots from Sand as well as their Kyumo allies could hit the Leaf Shinobi from the rear. They'd endured more than any sane man could to complete it, but their allies hadn't shown up, and that promised attack from the rear had yet to materialize. There is only so much even the toughest veterans can bear, and they were far past their limits. And so, the surviving Suna Nin turned tail and broke into a rout. In the end, none of them came any closer than 50 yards of their objective. Naruto's clones weren't done, however, and they took after the fleeing shinobi. "That's the end of that," Kiba said wonderingly, shaking his head. They'd been outnumbered at better than 30 to 1, but Naruto alone had been enough to stop the attack cold and beat back the attack. It had surprised the hell out of Kiba if more than 100 Nin hadn't died in that attack. Which was one hell of a number. True, they'd had the advantage of the terrain and had fought behind prepared defenses, but the scale of the victory was simply staggering. "Contact," Sasuke and Hinata announced simultaneously. The announcement left Kiba chagrined. Naruto's lone battle against the Suna Nin had been so engaging that the Chunin scout had forgotten that it was only a sideshow. True, if they'd been overrun in the assault, they would have ended up just as dead, but a Jinchuriki was on the main course and "Scram!" Sasuke shouted in warning. He followed his own advice by sunshining away from the hill. Naruto and Sakura knew their teammate well enough to follow his advice without question, but Kiba and Shino looked askance at Hinata. She did not reply, but her pallid face, the terrified look on her widened eyes, and the fact that she executed a shunshin herself told them all they needed to know. Akamaru and Kiba stampeded down the hill away from the whatever was approaching them, and Shino sunshined away himself. The world went white. By the time the damned hill was in view, Yujito felt as if she was going to burst with all the chakra she'd drawn from the two-tail. She'd also started transforming into the tailed beast, which was probably all that kept her from blowing sky high. So, she unleashed her attack the second she saw their objective. Then, she transformed fully into her jailed demon. The Nikomata was a master of fire, and the explosion from Yujito's attack easily rivaled the one Naruto'd thrown at his Suna assailants. Kiba, who was halfway down the hill, was picked up and thrown into the air. He landed hard and immediately lost consciousness from a broken and concussed head. It was a small mercy as a boulder weighing several hundred kilos bounced off his right hand a fraction of a second later. As the rain of debris stopped, Akamaru crawled to its master with 2 broken legs, numerous broken ribs and a broken tail, whining piteously. The dog licked its master, but the young Chunin was lost to the world in a coma. Fuck, Sasuke swore landing next to Naruto. He'd been prepared to fight an earth element using Jinchuriki against which his lightning would be effective and not a fire-wielding one. It's the two-tail and it's using fire. No shit, Yuke. You're buggered for sure. Naruto replied, forming clones. He was down to half his chakra, but he had plenty of fight left in him. And there were also the Kyubi or the Sage techniques to fall back on if the worst came to pass. The Nikomata launched another huge ball of fire at their position and the 2 Konoha nin split. Team 8, Naruto keyed in his radio, "This is way over your heads. Try to stay alive and engage the rest of the Jinchuriki's team. Stay away from the two-tail at all cost. Repeat, stay away from the two-tail at all cost." "We hear and comply," Shino's voice came back in reply. "Kiba's WIA and Hinata's stabilizing him. I'm moving to engage the enemy." "Roger," the blonde replied. "Sasuke, Sakura, the Nikomata is all yours. I'll join in the party after I neutralize her support." As Naruto left to take care of the support, Sasuke cursed his luck, dodging yet another ball of fire. He knew from confidential reports filed by survivors of close encounters of the Nikomata kind in the previous wars that the damn cat was a one-trick pony like the Shikaku. It could throw fire, and lots of it, practically a wall, from what he was seeing, and it had the reflexes of a cat on steroids, but that was about it. Simply put, the raven-haired Sharingan user faced a fire-breathing cat monstrosity with a human intellect holding its reins. Problem from his end was that he was a lightning adept with fire as his second element. True, he knew tons of water element techniques, but he simply did not have the monstrous reserves to waste like Naruto, and his water techniques were inefficient. But this much was certain. He wasn't going to win this battle by being on the defensive. "Where the fuck is that pink-haired wench when you need her?" he muttered as he immersed himself in his seal of power and darted in towards the two-tail. The beast nimbly jumped several hundred yards out of the way and threw a veritable storm of fireballs in his direction. Abandoning offense for the nonce, the Uchiha Scion used a Kawarimi to get the hell out of dodge and cut down an enemy nin who stood at arm's length and who had his back turned to the Sharingan user. Another terrifyingly large ball of flame zeroed unerringly on his position, and Sasuke obligingly used Kawarimi to snag another nin into the path of the fireball and escaped death once more. He heaved a sigh of relief as Sakura finally announced her presence with a monstrous punch to the Nikomata's torso that sent the beast skittering against the ground. Then she disappeared in a crowd of bunshins that went scampering in every direction. The giant cat yowled in pain as it regained its legs and opened its mouth wide in the direction where it thought its tormentor hidden. A huge ball of incandescent flame grew between its jaws, and friend and foe alike scampered aside as the tailed beast unleashed another monstrous explosion. "Fuck," Sasuke muttered as he shunshined next to the beast. He charged his ninjato with Chidori and used the lightning he'd guided over the blade to slice the cat's tendon in two. The Nikomata howled again, but as Sasuke charged between its legs, he noted that the wound healed almost as fast as he made it. That was better than Naruto's healing ability, and it did not bode well for his health in the short run. And true to his fears, the two-tail jumped high into the air and breathed fire at his position again. Sasuke shunshined out of the way of the cataclysmic wall of flames fractions of a second before it reached him. The air filled with the stench of hair and he patted the flames out. He'd almost lost his head there. The two-tail came down perfectly poised for a perfect 10-point landing and then, suddenly it was sailing up into the air with its head knocked back. Sakura landed hard on the ground and swatted at the Nin who charged her with glowing hands. The man slumped dead, his aorta cut. What the fuck is Naruto doing? These bastards are everywhere, she complained. Sasuke watched the beast fly away with an appreciative smile and chuckled at her comment. I'm sure he's doing his best. How many more shots have you got? He asked. Sakura had learned from Tsunade the use of seals to store chakra and using them to power the punches like she was to pummel the monster cat drained the reserves exceedingly fast. 5, maybe 6 punches. After that, I can give you ranged support with genjutsu, but that's it. The giant cat had landed by this time and regained its bearings. It bounded at the two Konoha Nin and they split in separate directions. Sakura used her bunshin once again to lose herself in the crowd before she shunshined out of the line of fire and used a henge on herself to transform into an ordinary-looking rock. Sasuke broke left, then turned and countercharged the Nikomata. Once again, he slid between its legs easily and used Raikiri to carve it from sternum to cervix. The wound was fatal to any living being, but this was a tailed beast and it wasn't even phased. Sasuke shunshined thrice as the beast went berserk once more. We should stop meeting like this, he told Sakura as the smoke and dust of explosions obscured the battlefield. That fucking cat is throwing explosions like crazy, Sakura groused, ignoring the comment as the ground shook from yet another huge explosion. Doesn't the stupid bitch ever run out of juice? A pebble bounced off her head in reply and more dirt fell on them. Problem is we're not making an impression. We need to get at the Jinchuriki. Or you can try cold-cocking the beast senseless, Sasuke suggested. Interesting idea. We'll try yours first. Where is the host inside all that flesh? Another fireball came flying in finally and Sasuke shunshined away, his Sharingan blazing. He headed straight at the cat, scanning it with his eyes and shunshined away again. The Nikomata was once again fooled into focusing solely on him and paid dearly for its oversight as Sakura appeared at its side and punched its foreleg. The leg bent at an unnatural angle and the beast crashed down hard. Unfortunately, its fall put Sakura in line of its mouth as she ran away and the two-tail spat another massive ball of fire at her. The flames engulfed the kunoichi before she could shunshin away and was thrown away by the explosion, a smoking wreck. Sasuke saw his teammate's fate as he came charging in, his whole body shrouded in lightning. His face hardened a tad as he slammed into the two-tail's chest and tore through the flesh to its precious cargo. He reached Yujito with plenty of energy to spare and rammed the Gojyo Fuin into her stomach. The beast vanished as its chakra supply failed and he collapsed next to Kumo Jinchuriki. Sakura was dead, but at least they had the two tails sealed. The Uchiha Scion sat there, unmindful of the goings-on in the battlefield around him for he did not know how long. Hey, hero, a familiar voice broke him out of his despondency, you defeated the two-tail. But I'm sealing it, Naruto appended with a chuckle. Get up, you lazy ass. We got work and Kiba needs medical attention. Sasuke turned to his friends and stared. I thought you died, he told Sakura. I used up the last of my stored chakra, but I weathered the blast. How? He asked. Used all of my reserves as a crude shield. Didn't think it'd work, but here I am, so I guess it did. Sasuke smiled and rose to his feet. He dragged his pink-haired teammate into a great big hug, laughing all the while. Naruto grinned and turned to Team 8. Ready? He asked. They nodded. Good, he said, I'm sending Kiba and Akamaru directly to Konoha along with the Jinchuriki. Tsunadesima will probably be able to help the former and the Godame must have custody of the latter. Will he be okay? Sasuke asked. What happened? He got caught in the first blast, Hinata replied. He's hurt pretty bad. The Uchiha Scion nodded and turned to Naruto as the latter summoned the two toads Kosuke and Gamakan. Kosuke, you're carrying the 5 of us to Danzo's camp, the blonde said, using ninjutsu to create a pool of water. And don't give me any lip like last time about how you can't carry so many people. I won't, Kosuke replied obediently. He'd get his own back for being ordered around later. Gamakan, please carry Kibakun and Akamaru to Konoha. They need urgent medical attention. Also, deliver this scroll to Godaima-sama. It contains the two-tailed Jinchuriki and I needn't stress the importance of this assignment. Gamakan nodded and departed with her precious cargo. Naruto turned to Kosuke and shot a cheeky smile. Let's pay the venerable Danzo-sama a visit now, shall we? Koiso, the Kaze no Kuni diplomat, was being his usual hateful self and was in the middle of yet another diatribe when a smallish toad jumped out of the bowl of water placed in one corner of the room. What's that beast doing here? He screeched, abandoning his rant midway. Danzo waved away. The guards who'd moved to assault the intruder and turned a benign gaze at the diplomat. I believe we're about to find out, Koiso-san, he said, watching the diplomat's reaction bemusedly as the toad regurgitated 5 of the vanished Konoha nin. He reflected mildly that they looked much the worse for wear and that the Inuzuka boy, his mutt and Shintani were missing. As the 5 nin saluted him, he nodded acknowledgement. It behooves a host to ensure sufficient privacy during diplomatic meetings with a representative of another state, Koiso needled. Surely, Hai no Kuni is not so far gone into barbarianism that you've forgotten your manners, Brigadier Danzo? Danzo ignored the blithering fool and raised an eyebrow at the 5 nin before him. Scenarios ran through his mind as to what might have happened, but his mind came up empty in its quest for a possible explanation. There were simply too many solutions to guess with any reasonable degree of certainty. Our investigation is successfully concluded, Danzo-sama, Sakura reported. Oh. I see that liaison Shintani is not with you and that you're missing one of your members, he asked somberly. To the diplomat, he said, these are the investigators appointed by Konoha to probe the murders of my men, Koiso-san. And what have they discovered? The official asked querulously. Sakura stepped forward with a smile. That Tsunagakure is preparing to wage war with Konoha once again. This time under the orders of Kaze no Kuni from prima facie evidence, she accused. Sand have enlisted Kyomo's help in this regard and have been using Kyomo nin to ambush patrols from Danzo-sama's command. Rubbish, the diplomat replied hotly. You have no evidence to support your unfounded and ill-advised malicious accusations. On the contrary, Naruto stepped forward, unfurling a sealing scroll and releasing its contents. We have captured Kyomo and Suna nin who were working on that mission. You'll have to explain to your neutral Kyomo allies that Konoha has taken custody of the Nibi no Nikomata. Nibi no Nikomata, the diplomat repeated slowly. Yes. Have fun explaining to Kyomo how you lost the Jinchuriki they'd lent you. Danzo smiled predatorially. I think this meeting's over and you suddenly have more pressing concerns, don't you, Koiso-san? Kakashi thanked the toad summon for the scroll and offered her a bit of candy before she went on her way. Alone, he lifted the slime-covered cylinder on his table once she'd vanished, mentally weighing it and tried to decide whether Naruto's gift called for a grin or a frown. News of the Jinchuriki of Nibi no Nikomata's capture was going to cause a lot of consternation in Kyomo and would certainly strain relations between wind and lightning. But it'd also give them more reason to stay the course against Hai no Kuni. In the final analysis, this meant that fire faced the same situation it'd invaded Te to avoid, a war on 2 fronts. But reading between the lines, the fifth thought things weren't really that bad. While he had no formal report from his children, Kakashi could well imagine what must have happened for the Nibi no Nikomata to fall into Konoha's hands. Suna must have suffered a defeat somewhere in its deserts, and while there was no telling the scale of Leaf's victory without further information, he was inclined to believe it pretty huge. And thanks to his team's efforts, instead of facing two Jinchuriki on two separate fronts now, Fire would face only one. That combined with Fire's naval advantage, the new volunteer regiments and the other assorted knickknacks meant that Hai no Kuni was very well off, indeed. "And what should I do with you, my little pretty?" he asked rhetorically, flipping the scroll in the air. He'd seen pictures of Yujito, the two-tailed Jinchuriki, in the bingo book, and he grinned gleefully at the thought of having her helpless in his arms. It was almost a dream come true, though it'd have been better if she'd been a lover rather than a prisoner. "You want something, one?" the leader of the largest band of nin operating in Rice Country asked the masked shinobi before him. Konoha Anbu Operative 1 was a messenger from the leader's Hai no Kuni allies. The conquest of Tea and the destruction of Odo 3 years back had sent all nations and hidden villages scampering to beef up their defenses as their world slowly ground towards a new era of war. It also left Rice a lawless power vacuum, as Leaf couldn't afford to maintain a large garrison with the demands Tea and Wind placed on its ninja corps. Naturally, Rice became a covert battleground for Leaf, Cloud and Rock as the elemental nations maneuvered around each other for an advantage. The only reason Rice did not become a sparking point for a very open and very bloody free-for-all was because all three villages and their parent nations had found their freedom of action restricted in various ways. The biggest factor had been that none of the three concerned hidden villages had considered themselves ready for an intense campaign against the others. To Konoha's disadvantage, they were stretched with their nin engaged in counterinsurgency operations in Tea as well as extending their influence in Sand through Danzo's peacekeepers. To the detriment of Kyumo and Iwa, they did not share a common border with Rice, but this was more than offset by a porous coastline. However, they had to fight an already entrenched Leaf within the late Orochimaru's fief that was small but powerful, as well as a native population that was sympathetic to Fire. But all three players had plenty of money to throw around and sow mischief, however, though the safe bet had been on either Cloud or Rock, with Konoha coming a distant third, if only because the former could bring more mass to bear to the battlefield. Fortunately for Hai no Kuni, they had Jiraiya to head the proxy war for most of the crucial first year, and he'd managed his campaign adroitly. Initially, he allied Leaf with clans that had fought Orochimaru, and then, as Anbu anger against the traitor and his helpers wound down, the Toad Sannin had made it policy to recruit those who surrendered. He'd also recruited and bonded nin, a euphemism for missing nin used by the hidden villages for those they worked with, for the war. The old samurai who'd replaced Jiraiya when the latter left command for reasons unknown hadn't been as skilled, but slowly, as in Tea, Fire gained the upper hand. Thanks to his hard work and the sacrifices of the men under his command, Rice was mostly peaceful these days. But the proxy war was far from over. If there was peace, it was simply because the opposing sides were catching a breather before the next war, which everyone knew was less than a year down the line. "Momotaro-dono requested me to personally deliver this communique to you, Hanzaka-sama," one replied. Indeed, the Fuma clan leader frowned as he collected the proffered scroll. He'd talked to Momotaro the day before during the weekly meeting, where they'd covered at some length issues of operational and tactical note. The retired samurai had reassured Hanzaki that the news from Hai no Kuni was all good. "So, what was in this scroll?" "Thanks, one. You may go." One nodded silently and disappeared. Hanzaki opened the document and read its contents. Then, he sent for his second in command. They didn't have a year more to prepare for war, after all. "I note that your report does not mention the fate of the two-tailed Jinchuriki, Haruno," Danzo asked mildly. "We felt that the less people who are in that compartment, the better, sir," Sakura replied primly. The one-eyed cripple nodded gravely, acknowledging the young kunoichi's skillful sidestep. Danzo's good humor at the Wind diplomat's discomfiture had died an untimely death once he'd realized the Jinchuriki was not among the POWs brought in by Kakashi's little bastards. He'd almost lost his temper and ordered them tortured then, and weakened as some of them had been by their battle at that point, his men would have subdued them easily, but he'd managed to control himself. They'd certainly sent the two-tail to their Yondaime and there was nothing he could do to get it back. Now, after listening to the pink-haired Kunoichi deliver the mission report, Danzo was glad he hadn't acted rashly. To have won a victory of such magnitude as young as they were, why he wasn't sure if the Jiraiya Orochimaru Tsunade trio would have been able to pull something similar off at that age. Kakashi had created something remarkable with his students, and if somehow, Danzo could suborn their loyalty to himself, his long-term goals would come that much closer to fruition. And the more he about it, the more he realized that he even had the right set of tools for the job. All right, Haruno, you've given me a lot of information to digest. I'm going to have to think about the implications of this mission long and hard, but it seems clear to me that we have an unprecedented window of opportunity on our hand. Sakura nodded silently, wondering when the old fool would get to the point. If he wanted to launch an offensive against Suna, why couldn't he come out and say it straight? You're dismissed. Feel free to goof off for the rest of the day within the confines of the fort. Inform Uchiha Sasuke that I want to meet him at my tent later in the evening. Sakura stood up and saluted. Yes, Danzo-sama. Relax and get some rest. You've earned it and more after this mission. The field hospice stank mildly of shit and rang with the groans of the sick, but for all that, it was surprisingly clean, thanks to the orderlies. The cause of the stink, the commandant of the Suna garrison was all too familiar with. There were 40 very ill men under the massive tent and another 100 or so samurai outside who had the runs to varying degrees of severity. Report, the commandant ordered after inspecting the sick. The senior doctor on duty scratched his chin. The man looked overworked, sleep-deprived, very ragged, and his uniform looked scruffy, but he and his compatriots had done a great job saving as many people as they had. So, the commandant was willing to overlook the man's lapse of discipline for the present. The numbers of infected has come down for the second day in a row. Hopefully, we've got this thing beat and the trend will continue to improve. How many today? 7 serious enough to admit and about 40 more that are infected, but don't need to be admitted. We've got them all quarantined, of course. And 4 dead. That's 1 more dead than yesterday, the commandant pointed out with a grimace. Yes, but I think we've lost as many people as we're going to. Oh, we may lose a handful more before we eradicate this outbreak, but that's about it. Good. How soon can the sick return to duty? The first one will probably be fit day after tomorrow. But the number of unfit isn't going to come under 100 for at least a week. The commandant nodded grimly. His men had followed sanitation procedure by the book for the most part. The only instruction in the damned manual they hadn't followed was to properly heat water or disinfect it with alcohol before drinking. Since he'd known from first-hand experience how unruly his soldiers were under the influence, he'd been unwilling to grant them access to booze. And their austere and rather limited supply chain couldn't bear enough wood for the required volume of potable water and still carry enough comestibles for the men to survive. Even still, for the runs to spread this fast through the garrison, it was certain that the water supply was compromised by saboteurs. And if the commandant ever got his hands on the guilty party, he would ensure the bastards were skinned alive and quartered for killing close to 70 samurai. The watchstander at the messenger bird tower in Konoha enticed the newly arrived pigeon into her reach with an offer of grain. The bird drew ever closer, pecking one kernel after another until the watchstander's hands swooped down from behind to catch it by its neck. Sasaki-san, she called aloud, recognizing the breed of the bird. One of the special pigeons just came in. Sasaki, the middle-aged caretaker of Konoha's messenger birds, emerged from his office with a frown on his face. The special pigeons, there was no name for the breed and in fact, they did not officially exist, were the product of Konoha's own experiments after the founding of the village. The objective was to create a breed of homing pigeons that could fly higher and faster than any other. The early results had all been failures, but Leaf had succeeded some 40 years back and reaped the just reward since. That'll be all. Return to your duty, the caretaker told the watchstander, collecting the bird. Yes, sir. Sasaki nodded and walked back to his office, wondering whether he wanted roasted pigeon or pigeon soup this evening and feeling glad that he wasn't an active shinobi any longer. No news that the special pigeons had carried back to Konoha had ever been good, after all. Kakashi looked the 3 golden pips nestled in the ANBU intelligence captain's hand and shook his head. Yet another confirmation, he asked his ANBU advisor tiredly. It had been a long day and he'd been neck-deep in paperwork and meetings. Why couldn't his intel chief see that there was no need for more confirmation of Kumo's complicity in Suna's treachery? I don't think we need any more confirmation that Suna and Kumo have got it in for us. This one's from Grass, Hokage-sama, the masked commander replied somberly. Kakashi sat up straighter in his seat. Grass equated to IWA and those bastards were tough customers. Grass? You sure this is correct? He asked. Then, resignedly, of course, you are. You wouldn't be here if you weren't disturbed by this news. It was one of our sleeper agents in Grass that sent this, sir. There are 4 more, but we've received no confirmation from the others. We're trying to obtain independent confirmation now. Kakashi thought about it. We'll forward the message to the daimyo, of course, but with the addendum that we haven't got independent confirmation on this one. Yes, Hokage-sama. What's the status of our units on the Grass border? Weak, the ANBU commander replied. Grass being one of our oldest and staunchest allies, we maintain several nominal garrisons on their border as you're no doubt aware. And they are garrison troops in the truest sense of the word, too. Even the shinobi complement, Kakashi appended, feeling less confident by the second. I'm afraid it's much worse, sir. Oh. We sent a communique 2 days back to move some of those troops to reinforce the garrisons on the border of Rain and River. Kakashi groaned inwardly. This was exactly what a commander wanted to hear on the eve of a war. One of his flanks was unprotected and an enemy was about to spring a surprise attack to exploit his weakness on that front. Now I know why you hurried here with this message. How bad is it really on the border? The forces are spread thin, Hokage-sama. The Western Highway and the provincial capital are well defended and we can hold them against even a full-scale attack, but everything to the west of the highway is exposed and vulnerable. Kakashi nodded grimly and turned to his aide. Fire had trusted its longtime ally Kusa no Kuni to stand by its side in the coming war and all signals from the Grass Court had implied such was certainly the case. Naturally, since Kusa's loyalty was assured and because Grass hadn't indicated any hostile moves on Iwa's part, and Konoha's spies within Earth hadn't indicated otherwise either, Hai no Kuni's planners had assumed it was okay to order some of the troops stationed on the Grass border to the hot frontier with River, Aim and Taki. Now, they were going to pay for their mistake. Send for Jiraiya. Tell him that I need his advice, he told the Chunin. To the ANBU commander, we'll continue this meeting in another 30 minutes with Jiraiya sitting in. In the meanwhile, see to it that the messages to the daimyo as well as the garrison commanders are prepared. Most importantly, we need independent confirmation of Kusa's betrayal. Work to expedite that. The Tsuchi no Kuni commander raised the teacup to his lips and took a sip. The green tea was scalding hot, which was just the way he preferred it. It goes good, he asked his Grass counterpart. The Grass polished off the last sushi and nodded. Surprise is almost complete. Fire has little or no idea that we're coming at them, Inoue-san. Brigadier Kaneo Inoue, commander of the 4-regiment strong task force sent to invade Fire, smiled pleasantly. It wasn't every day that you were able to surprise your enemy thus. Konoha had managed it against Orochimaru during the Chunin exams held in Leaf 3 years earlier, and look what happened to the snake Sannin. I concur, he acquiesced, which brings us to what we're going to do about our advantage. The agreed-upon timetable is a week from now. You intend to advance it, Brigadier? The liaison asked. Yes, I do. Tell me, how soon can your troops be ready to launch an attack? The Kusa colonel thought it over for a couple of seconds. I can have them prepped for an assault by mid-morning tomorrow. Inoue smiled. Let's not rush the men. Given their dispositions, the fire pussies will need at least 3 days to concentrate before they dare challenge us on the open field. And that's once they learn about my men and I. They'd have learned it from the farmers by now, which means we have plenty of time to organize our forces, the Kusa colonel observed. Dawn day after tomorrow sound good to you then? Yes, I think it does. Jounin Rensuke Isegai rose from his bow and handed the daimyo of Kaze no Kuni the scroll delivered by the signals people. The ruler of wind nodded curtly at his Jounin guard, the only one visible of the dozen in his security detail, and unfurled the scroll expertly. When he was done, the daimyo laid the message beside him and turned to his guard. The communique had been sent by Koiso, who'd been informed by Danzo of the two-tailed Jinchuriki's capture and who'd also seen some of the captured Kyumo and Suna shinobi. Danzo's sheer effrontery was galling, and the daimyo had just about enough of the cripple and his band of murdering troublemakers. Isegai-san. Yes, Lord. I want to send a message to Suna as well as the units hemming in Danzo and the feckless fiends of that madman. It must reach the concerned parties before nightfall, today. It'll be done, Lord. The daimyo thought about it. The message is simple. The cripple has declared war on Wind. Our forces are to rescue the hostages held at the old war cripple's fort. Towards this end, they will attack the fort and take it. Tell them I want Danzo's head on a pike before the end of the week. Yes, Lord. Good. It was so hot that there was scarcely anything alive on the desert floor, but for a few ants here and there. There was no wind and absolutely no humidity. Presently, one of the ants scurrying along the desert surface met a sudden end as Rubber-soled Foot stepped on it. The ant passed away unremarked and unremembered as its nemesis took a minute off to crack his neck and spit on the ground. I hate this fucking desert, the man cursed. The man's partner, the mercenary, glared at Psychopath. The object of his ire appeared immune to his anger, which was normal behavior for the asshole. I mean, I get the whole fucking dead zone, devoid of all life and all that crap, but honestly, this sucks. There's simply no fucking thing to kill around here. How's a man supposed to worship his god when there aren't any fucking sacrifices around? I'm getting tired of your constant complaints, Haydn, the mercenary replied through gritted teeth. He left unsaid his desire to rip out his companion's throat and stomp on his grave. That part was implicitly understood after yesterday when he tried and accomplished just that. Like a servant of the god could expect anything better from a godless heathen like you coin-counting whore, Haydn retorted. The mercenary snorted, clamping down on the berserk fury that threatened to burst forth. Think what you will, Haydn, he warned, but you're approaching the point where I grind you to paste and feed you as pig slop. We'll see how you enjoy your immortality as pigs hit. The psychopath spat on the ground in reply. Like a heathen had any real hope of killing a true disciple. What are we going to do, Kakuzu? He asked. We have been on station for more than a week now, and if there's been a second patrol of those Konoha pussies in our general direction, it didn't come within a dozen miles of us. The fucking cowards. Kakuzu had been debating the same question himself. Since Haydn ran amok among the Leaf Patrol and the heavily reinforced force came to retrieve the shredded corpses, there hadn't been any squad sent out on their flank as far as he could tell. This was bad given the unofficial bounty attached to the heads of each of Danzo's men in Wind, and because he and Haydn had been instructed by the Akatsuki leadership to weaken the war cripple, which they couldn't do if the latter avoided them. Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. If they refuse to come to us, then we go to them. How are you, my poor baby? Inazuka-tsum asked. Kiba grinned foggily at his mom. He's awakened from a drug-induced slumber only minutes earlier and wasn't thinking all that well. I'm feeling great, Mom, he slurred. How's Akamaru? Tsum looked at the bandages that covered the amputated stump of Kiba's right hand and tried to mask her thoughts. She'd seen Kiba's canine companion earlier and Akamaru was even worse off. He's doing fine, she replied, faking a smile. She started to say more, but a masked ANBU interrupted her and asked her to wait outside the room. Kiba was a first-hand witness of the Two Tails capture and Konoha wasn't about to take any chances of him blurting out that fact while under the influence of painkillers. Tsum shot a look at her son and walked out before she burst into tears. The amputation was clean and the medics had promised they'd have her son fully healed before the end of the week, but Kiba's days as a frontline shinobi was over and with it went his dreams. The shepherd was frightened, but then, he had good reason to be. He was in the middle of an army camp surrounded by armed soldiers and facing the commandant. You're serious? The young fop of an officer asked disbelievingly for the 7th time. Major Toshiaki Mukai was a pleasant enough fellow and a very amicable one who was very popular with the ladies, but he was not officer-grade material. Not by a long shot. His father was a moderately powerful nobleman in the Fire Daimyo's court and he'd received his command through patronage. If the idiot had been one of his sons, the shepherd would have taken a belt to the imbecile's scrawny ass by this point. But with samurai around and the moron being the son of a noble, he was powerless. Yes, Lord. A combined Kusa and Tsuchi army is amassed near the border. My son-in-law heard Earth Country samurai in the woods this side of the border when he was returning with firewood this morning. The poor bloody fool is frightened out of his wits, the major told his adjutant, who was no intellectual heavy himself. The XO nodded sanely. Mukai was right, of course. As he always was. The shepherd was probably a hysteric. The shepherd shook his head. He'd come to the camp for the reward money he'd thought the samurai would give him and because as a patriot of fire, he did not want the Earth Country savages in the land of his ancestors. But his message was falling on deaf ears. Well, so be it. It was the samurai's job to defend the land from invaders and if they couldn't be bothered to do it properly, then pox on them and their clans. The shepherd had his family to mind, and he and they would head to the nearest fortified city this very day. Hopefully, the garrison there would be more competent than these cretins. Well, it's time for me to meet Danzasama, Sasuke said with a bright grin as he stood up and stretched. Naruto made a face. What do you think he wants with you? Sakura asked. The Sharingan wielder shrugged. Don't know. Honestly, I'm more interested in how Kiba's faring. I'm sure he's doing fine, Naruto replied. Kiba-kun had nothing life-threatening, Hinata added, but I'm concerned about his hand. Sakura put an arm around the Hyuga heir. The pink-dressed kunoichi had examined Kiba herself before they sent him to Konoha and the bones in his hand had been crushed to powder. She didn't think even Tsunade or Kabuto could save it. Don't fret, Hinata, Shino consoled the girl. She'd spent a while crying for her teammate and his dog. Kiba's a survivor. I'll be back soon, Sasuke, who looked distinctly uncomfortable, announced and left. Naruto turned to Shino and raised an eyebrow. You want to play shogi or something? I'm bored. The meeting had gone well so far. Danzo had struck a small talk so far, though Sasuke got the feeling that this was really an interview and he was being felt out for a possible alliance. Help yourself to another cup of tea, the old warhawk suggested, lifting the tea kettle to serve Sasuke himself. No, thank you, Sasuke replied, I'm stuffed. Danzo nodded and put away the kettle. So, tell me, are you satisfied with your position in Konoha? He prodded. Sasuke smiled indulgingly. It was an interview to see if he could be bought, after all. Normally, he'd have gone for Danzo's throat, but Kakashi-sensei had asked him to leave the old fool alive. So, he'd suffer the crippled, cane-wielding idiot's foibles. Very much so, to tell the truth. It's very exciting. And your personal life? What's there not to have? My team is my family and I have great friends and teachers. Danzo smiled sardonically at the reply. Family. What a laugh. Indeed? What then of revenge? The smile on Sasuke's face faded a bit. It'll come when in due time. The Uchiha will be avenged before the clan arises from the ashes once again. That's really too bad, Danzo stated. Oh? Yes, it'd be such a shame to kill your brother. Anger flashed in Sasuke's eyes now. Permission to speak freely, Danzo-sama, he said. This is a conversation between an officer of the ninja corps and a clan leader. You may feel free to speak as you will without fear. The raven-haired Uchiha nodded curtly. Very well. If you value your life even a little, you'll apologize for your ill-advised comment regarding the murderer, or I'll call you out and strangle you with your entrails. Danzo smiled. My apologies if I've hurt your sensibilities, Uchiha Dono. It is sad that you hate your only surviving kin so. Kin? Sasuke ground coldly. He murdered my parents. He massacred my relatives. He made me relive their deaths 1,000 times as a child that night. I assure you, the crazed murderer is no kin of mine. Well, as you say, he murdered your parents. He massacred your relatives and for whatever reason, he made you relive their deaths 1,000 times. But was he crazed or did he do it for a reason? Sasuke's eyes narrowed further. What do you imply? What if I told you that your brother is perhaps the greatest patriot of Fire Country that's alive today? Danzo asked in reply. He's a lunatic and a murderer, Sasuke replied, raising his voice a little. He's a patriot who executed your clan because they were plotting treason. He did so at the behest of the third Hokage, one of the teachers you so love. Sasuke's eyes turned pinwheels and he tensed ready to explode, drawing on his seal of power. The nerve the cripple must have to accuse his besmirch his clan honor, and to tarnish their good name and that of the Sandame. Don't you want to know the truth of that terrible night, Uchiha? Listen to me and then decide whether you want to act rashly or not. You have 2 minutes, Sasuke said, calming down and releasing the heady power granted by the seal, but not his Sharingan. If you fail to convince me, your life is forfeit for treason against the Godame by virtue of attempting to suborn his shinobi against him. Danzo barked in laughter, waving his guards away. No tailed beast has ever attacked any village, Uchiha Dono, except the 9 tails. Did you ever wonder why it attacked Konoha some 15 years ago? He asked. Sasuke nodded assent. Yes, he'd wondered. Hell, Sakura had even asked Jiraiya-sensei the same question during their training. The Sannin had not been able to answer her then and he did not have an answer for the old cripple now. Then consider this. The Kyuubi ignored the traps we set, the obstacles we built and the resistance we offered that day. Sasuke scowled and did not reply. But his mind drifted to Sakura's discussion with Jiraiya on the subject. Tell me then, is it normal behavior for any sane animal to walk into danger when there is safety in another direction? Don't bother with an answer for it is obvious. But the 9 tails did exactly that, Uchiha. This raised suspicions that it was being controlled. Now, there have been 2 methods of controlling the Kyuubi in written history and both relied on bloodlines. The Senju Mokuton and the Uchiha Sharingan to be precise. And the Mokuton never drove any tailed beast crazy. The evidence, you'll admit, pointed to the Uchiha. Sasuke snorted. That's not evidence. It is conjecture at best and a flimsy one at that. Here's an alternate explanation. New bloodlines are born even today and maybe There's a new one that can control the Kyubi? Or how about an even simpler one? The Kyubi went mad. Animals in the wild do tend to do that, you know? And not just from rabies, either. True, Danzo conceded, but your clan was murdered years later. And the story is only begun. Do you want to hear the rest of it, or do you want to denounce me now and try your hand at assassinating me? If the latter, I promise that you will not succeed. Say your story, Snakecharmer, Sasuke retorted coldly. Danzo barked laughter again. There were suspicions against the Uchiha at very high levels after the Nine Tails was beaten. And they were very aware of it. Promotions and opportunities were denied them. Watchers were assigned to the clan compound. The powers of the Uchiha police were curtailed. The clan prodigy, your brother Itachi, was weaned away from the elders and into Sarutobi's fold. The feelers your clan sent to make peace were denied. There was to be no compromise. What else was your clan to do in such a situation? What else could they do? The Sandaime forced them to plot revolt, and so they did. And when their plot was discovered, Itachi was ordered to carry out an execution. He was to sacrifice his honor and your clan so that the third could rid himself of one of the major political blocs in Konoha. This is what happened, Uchiha Dono, and this is the true face of your masters. A frown marred Sasuke's face. Such an order wouldn't have been written. How is it you know, Danzo-sama? He asked. Clearly, the cripple was hiding something. But what was it? Sasuke did not doubt that there was some truth in the story, but he needed to know how much was fact and how much fiction. When Sarutobi, Hamura and Koharu plotted your clan's death, I was the only one to speak against it. The Uchiha had served the village loyally for too long for their loyalty to be rewarded with treachery, but their decision was made and I could not sway them. Sasuke snorted. Yes, woe be you, he said, turning to leave. He had much to ponder and he could best do it in the company of his family. For one, what should he do if Danzo was telling the truth? What would Naruto and Sakura do for that matter? Should he forgive Itachi? Should they leave Konoha? What should he do? Wait, Uchiha Dono. Sasuke turned. You'll understand that if Konoha learns you know the truth about your clan, your life is forfeit, don't you? Danzo asked. Of course. Good, then. I hope you'll consider what you've learned today and make the right decision as to whether you want to serve the murderers of your family or avenge your clan's deaths. Yes. After Sasuke left, Danzo motioned to one of his guards. Keep an eye on that one. If he takes a false step, poison all 5 of them. Sasuke tried to shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious as he stalked back to his teammates. His eyes glinted anger at Danzo's insinuations, but he could not deny that the old cripple's argument sounded reasonable to his ears. The idea that Itachi wasn't a crazed, murdering bastard certainly had its own undeniable appeal, even though it made him feel green at the gills. If Itachi was a patriot, then Sasuke's life had no meaning because he'd built his life around the vow he'd taken to avenge his clan's pointless murder. And what of his friends and teachers? For the last 2 years, old man Sarutobi had been like the grandfather he'd never had, training and nurturing Sasuke and the other 2 members of Team 7 as they grew into young adulthood. Could that kind oldster have ordered the murder of the Uchiha clan as Danzo accused? What of their teacher, the current Hokage Hatake Kakashi? Did he know of the betrayal of the Uchiha clan as well? And Jiraiya? Was his whole life a lie and his friends and family really his sworn enemies hiding behind a veil of kindness and concern? It took a moment to realize where his thoughts were heading and Sasuke shook himself out of it. After a fashion, he could bring himself to believe that Itachi was a patriot, because he could still recall the gentle elder brother who'd showered him with love before the massacre. He would still kill his elder brother, of course, for the sullied honor of the clan, if nothing else, but he could forgive his brother in his heart of hearts if he were no longer a monster. But it didn't feel right that the bonds he'd cultivated since then with his friends, teachers and family were lies. Certainly, Naruto and Sakura were as close to Sasuke as Itachi or his parents ever were. And they'd shown him nothing but companionship and love. The same could be said of Kakashi, Shikamaru, and the others. If Konoha had ruthlessly ordered the murder of his clan, the same village had also given him love, purpose and direction in life. The last two, Sasuke had received from Itachi on that fateful night as well, but he'd realized long since that their pursuit would have led him down a path of no return and truly destroyed the Uchiha clan. This way, the way he'd been taught by his friends, was better, and like a phoenix returned from the ashes, it led to the rebirth of the Uchiha clan and something resembling normalcy in his life. All that reasoning mattered for naught in the final analysis, however. Sasuke was driven by an uncontrollable desire to know the truth, and as he opened the tent flap, he knew he was committed to a mistake that was probably going to earn him some broken bones and Sakura's tender ministrations at the very least. At the worst. "Naruto, forgive me," he whispered as the tent flap fell back into position behind him and the blonde's blue eyes made contact with the spinning crimson irises of his Dojutsu. Sasuke was transported into Naruto's mindscape and he found himself facing the Kyuubi in its massive cage with his friend and brother beside him. The beast looked even less pleased than usual to see the blonde once it recognized his companion. Sarutobi was in the middle of some routine paperwork when the toad emerged from the trough placed in a corner of the room for that very purpose. Knowing that he had a few more seconds left, the retired Hokage speed-read the executive summary of the next document on the pile and penned his signature. Then, he carefully set down his brush and addressed his guest. "I wish I could say that your arrival is unexpected, Jiraiya." The Sannin goggled. "You've already heard of the Tsuchi invasion force, sensei?" he asked his aged teacher. It was Sarutobi's turn to be surprised. "Tsuchi no Kuni? Do tell. I'd thought you'd drop by to discuss the Wind and Lightning Alliance. Well, throw in earth and grass into the mix as well. The combined might of 4 elemental nations against Hai no Kuni. The situation is dire. It's even worse than you think, sensei. The officer in charge of the grass border is Toshigaki's son, that incompetent bumbler Mukai." Sarutobi knew of the officer in question. Mukai was a political appointee whose father, the Lord Toshigaki, had bought him a commission as an officer in the Hai no Kuni army. It hadn't taken much time for Mukai's superiors to realize they had an idiot on their hands. However, the Lord Toshigaki had paid a lot of money to ensure his son was made an officer of the line and called in a lot of political favors he'd carefully accumulated over the years for this very purpose. So, the Hai no Kuni general staff followed tradition and sent him to the quietest border, that being grass. "That is bad," Sarutobi observed with a grimace. He could guess how badly Mukai had managed to screw up the situation on the ground. "The situation on the grass border is dire. The invasion is imminent and the regular army units are badly out of position. Our Nin units are stretched and the enemy has a clear and unopposed route to the hinterland of Hai no Kuni. In other words, we have exposed our jugular." Sarutobi nodded grimly. "I suppose the Godame put you in charge of defending the grass border." "Yes, which is why I came to you. I need Enko and her unit. I've dispatched them to Rice already to reinforce Hanzaki's troops to defend the Kyumo front. Hanzaki will have to make do with the resources he has in hand, sensei. He can certainly hold on for a week or two. We don't have that luxury on the grass border. We need heavy hitters there and we need them now." Yes, I understand," Sarutobi replied, picking up his brush and pulling out a fresh parchment. "But I can't leave the Kyumo border as is. By all accounts, the Reikich's younger brother has absolute control of the Hachibi and we need some heavy hitters to keep him and his storms occupied. Iwa's got 2 berserk Jinchuriki on their hands and they're going to be deployed against Mukai," Jiraiya pointed out evenly as Sarutobi frowned in thought. Tell you what, the retired Sandaime said after a while, I'll ask Genkakan to loan you 2 companies of her unit. She'll be left with the remaining 2 companies. I hope the Godaimes promised reinforcements on the grass border because I'll be sending whatever I can scrounge to Rice. I suppose that'll have to do. Now, I don't suppose you have any idea where Anko and her unit are at this moment? Check at the depots between here and the Rice border. I'd start at the halfway mark, if I were you, Sarutobi replied, handing his orders to Jiraiya. Good. Thanks, sensei. Lord, the ambassador from Kyumo craves the boon of an audience with the daimyo, the gopher informed the chamberlain of Kaze of Kuni. The chamberlain scrunched his face. He could guess why the ambassador would want to meet with him. With the Nibi no Nikomata captured, there was a tremendous loss of face and wind needed a victory against Danzo before the daimyo faced the worthy. And the daimyo had provided very clear instructions on what he was to do when Kyumo's emissary approached the court with this request. Tell him the daimyo is currently indisposed and will meet him at the earliest. Sasuke and Naruto appeared inside the latter's mind, and an instant later, the blonde's fists crashed into the former's face with the force of a wrecking ball. Sasuke spun into the air and splashed back down. He lay clutching his jaws as Naruto glared down at him. Sasuke, when this mission is over, I'm gonna rip you apart for what you did just now, Naruto growled angrily. Okay, Sasuke said, sounding resigned to his fate. He's known the consequences of his actions before he acted. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Is that all you got to say, asshole? I'm sorry, Naruto, but I had to confirm something and the Kyuubi can give me the answers I seek. You could have asked, Naruto growled. You didn't have to Sharingan into my mind without permission like that. I'm truly sorry, Naruto. No, you aren't. Not right now. But after this mission, you'll be sorry, all right. Sorry that you ever violated my mind like that. Sasuke looked as contrite as the blonde had ever seen him, but if he thought it was going to get him out of what he had coming, he was wrong. Sasuke did not say anything in reply. Naruto snorted in disgust. Let's get this over with. What do you want? Kyuubi. Then, Kyuubi, you'll meet, Naruto spoke with a tone of finality. An instant later, the 2 teens winked out and appeared at another corner of the maze of tunnels that was both Naruto's chakra system and mindscape. Pitiful worm, the Kyuubi growled as soon as it espied Naruto and Sasuke before its cage, you dare approach me bearing your accursed eyes. The Kyuubi did not like Sasuke much. In fact, it hated him more than it hated Naruto or the Yondaime, which was saying something. Its chakra began to push against and out of the cage to poison the teen even as the beast struggled to escape its prison and grind Sasuke to dust. Sasuke's Sharingan spun fast and bore into the Kyuubi's eyes. Entranced, it held his gaze for a few seconds and its chakra flowed back into the cage. Finally, the beast's struggles ceased altogether. Its docile behavior amazed Naruto, even though he'd seen Sasuke do this several times during training in the last 2 years. Tell me why you attacked Hai no Kuni, Kyuubi, Sasuke asked, maintaining eye contact. One from your accursed clan, the one whose chakra is even more vile than mine, the one whose eyes are as powerful as yours made me, the tailed beast replied in metronome. Naruto startled at the admission. No wonder Sasuke had acted so with his Sharingan. Uchiha Madara, the raven-haired boy asked, ignoring his teammate for the nonce. If he took his eyes away now, the Kyuubi would be even more of a bitch than it usually was. And as far as he knew, he was the only Uchiha beside Madara who'd ever been able to control the Kyuubi in any manner. Even caught in the Sharingan spell, the Kyuubi growled at hearing the name of Sasuke's ancestor. Sasuke nodded and deactivated his Dojutsu. That was all the confirmation he needed. Now, to verify what old man Sarutobi knew. Naruto staggered as Sasuke dropped out of his mind. He knew from experience that only a few seconds had passed since his friend dragged them both to meet the Nine-Tail, which made the event all the more disorienting. Sakura looked concerned and started towards him, but Naruto shooed her away. He flashed the hand sign for security and she nodded. The seal she'd placed on the room as soon as she saw Sasuke catch the blonde with his jujutsu would take another 10 minutes to break by a seal master. Naruto nodded at her and turned his attention to the matter at hand. "It's gotta be a lie, Sasuke," he said as Sakura, Hinata and Shino watched in interest from the sidelines. "I don't think so," Sasuke retorted. "He died more than half a century ago at the Battle of Valley of the End," Naruto replied. "There haven't been more than a handful of people in the history of the elemental nations, myself included, who could control the Kyuubi, Naruto. He's dead, Sasuke. You can't control the 9 tails from the spirit realm." "What if he isn't? His body was never recovered," the raven-haired boy retorted. "What are you guys talking about?" Sakura interjected herself into the conversation finally, speaking, she knew, for both Shino and Hinata both. The Battle of Valley of the End? Kyuubi? What was going on with the boys? Later, Sakura. "I promise I'll tell you as soon as I myself find out what's going on," Naruto replied. The pink-dressed Kunoichi turned to her other teammate. "Sasuke?" Sasuke ignored her, focusing his attention on his other teammate. "I have to meet Sarutobi Sensei. Take me there." Naruto shook his head. "You're being a stubborn and idiotic SOB today," he muttered as he formed 2 clones as decoys. To Sakura, he said, "He won't answer you, Sakura. The idiot's gone crazy on us. Hold the fort while we're gone and make as if the 2 of us are already here. I'll send a toad ahead before we return so that you can get the security arrangements back in place." "How long will you be gone?" she asked. Naruto cast a glance at the agitated Sasuke. "Not too long. This is a fool's errand if there ever was one," he replied, summoning Kosuke for the journey. "Hey, boss, need me already?" the toad asked. "Yep. I need you to take Sasuke and I to Sarutobi's place in T." Kensuke whistled. "That's some way off, boss. I need a bigger bonus. I'll get you grasshoppers roasted to a crisp and dipped in chocolate." Kensuke drooled at the offer. The boss must really want this favor to offer such a succulent treat. But Kensuke wasn't a born-yesterday tadpole. "How much?" "A handful and not a grasshopper more. And only after I return to the village." Sasuke's hands. "Not yours. They're too small." Naruto grumbled but nodded. Knowing Sasuke as he did, the bastard wouldn't even lift a finger when it came to catch and fry the stupid insects. He'd have to pay for a drink to get the little critters. "Hop on board, boss," Kensuke enthused, pulling both the blonde and his teammate into his mouth for the ride to tea. His teammates watched Jugo with a mix of disbelief and humor as he mooned another villager. The man shook his head in disgust, cursed drunks in general and walked away with his eyes averted. "How many does that make?" Karen asked aloud as the guffaws died down. "That's the 7th one," someone piped. But the reaction of that matron was a sight for sore eyes. Karen shook her head wryly. "The bastard's fucking crazy," she guffawed as Jugo did something else insane. "Watch this, Karen," Jugo announced loudly just before he projectile puked into the middle of the street. "He can't handle his liquor, but at least he's a happy drunk," Anko commented cheerfully from her seat. "Anyways, the ass is going to have a terrible time marching tomorrow morning. We'll probably have to toss him on one of the wagons, the idiot," Karen agreed. Anko stood up and motioning Karen to follow her, retired to a quieter corner of the bar. Karen left the revelry behind quietly and followed her commanding officer. "You haven't shared your thoughts about our orders," Anko observed once they were out of earshot. "And I know the look on your face. Do you have any reservations about them?" Karen shook her head. It wasn't going back to Rice Country that she minded. Some of the other survivors did, but she did not. No, but the thought of rice did bring back memories of Kimimaro, and how she and Kabuto had killed him with Jiraiya's consent after they surrendered to Konoha 3 years back. The Bone Wielder had been entirely too loyal to Orochimaru that it served the best interest of his comrades and Konoha to have him pass quietly into the night. Once Kabuto convinced Jiraiya of that fact, the Sannin had looked the other way as they committed the deed. With that murder, Kabuto had secured his place in Konoha's research division, and she had saved the life of the surviving cursed seal bearers who depended on her. To say the truth, she wasn't bothered by the memory of the cold-blooded killing. Kimimaro's death had opened her to a world of friendship and opportunity. Jugo was her best friend now, and the sky was the limit within Konoha's ninja corps so long as he worked diligently and was loyal to the village. So, no, she did not mind killing the last Kaguya at all. No, if anything, I'm ambivalent about our orders. Obviously something is troubling you, Anko pointed out. What is it? Anko, her present commander, did not know of Karen's last act of treachery committed after the surrender, and Karen had long since decided she would take the truth of what happened to Kimimaro to the grave. So, she redirected her superior's thoughts on a harmless path. Orphans though most of us were, I've been thinking about how gullible we must have been that Orochimaru was able to suborn us to his cause so easily, Major. Anko nodded. She understood exactly what the red-haired NCO was talking about, having been caught in the madman's influence at one time herself. He always had a way with words. That he did, Karen agreed. Anyways, I'm glad he's dead. No one misses him for sure and certain, Anko replied with a smile. She herself remembered when the Godame, Jiraiya and Sarutobi approached her to take command of misguided kids who'd suffered at Orochimaru's hands as she had. She'd been only too happy to oblige, and she'd slowly molded the original survivors and other newly created bearers of the Seals of Power into a loyal battalion of Konoha Nin with help from both the head shrinkers and the research division. Very true, Karen acquiesced again. Then, noting one of her people on watch duty approach, yes, Hiro? Jiraiya-zama's here to see the major, Sergeant, Hiro replied. The old perv? Anko wondered aloud. What's he doing here? I wouldn't know, Major. Anko nodded. Well, you'd better see to escorting him here, hadn't you, Hiro? Without snapping a salute, they were on the field, and Anko was no idiot to demand her personnel salute her in public and identify her for assassins. Hiro turned on his heels towards the nearest exit of the bar, but his actions were moot. Jiraiya had followed him into the bar and now introduced himself. No need, son. I'll take it from here, the Sannin said. Hiro turned to Anko for further instructions. She dismissed him with a curt nod and he left. Jiraiya-zama, she greeted the Sannin, what brings you to our little corner of the woods? Jiraiya produced a scroll from nowhere and handed it to her. He waited patiently as the Anko read it and turned it over to Karen. You put me in a difficult position, the major confessed. I need every hand I can get. The Hachibi is a monster. Jiraiya shrugged serenely. Orders are orders, and we have a new front opening along the grass border with an invasion imminent, and we need the forces, Anko. Don't see how my people can help there. We're days away from grass. If that border's undefended, we'd be better off pulling forces closer to the action to defend it. Someone else is doing that, Jiraiya replied. As for why your unit, there are 3 reasons. 1. Your unit is cohesive. 2. They have the necessary firepower. And 3. I can transport them to the front much faster than you realize. I do not want to know how you're doing to do it, do I? Nope. Need to know and all that. What I figured. Karen, see to it that Jiraiya-zama gets our 2 best companies. As Jiraiya and Karen walked away, he just had to ask the red-haired Kunoichi one question. I'm going to get your 2 least strength companies, aren't I? Karen flashed him a bright smile. Yep. The Sannin sighed. What I thought. Aren't you two supposed to be in Kaze no Kuni right now? Sarutobi asked, eyeing the two boys standing before him with a stern expression. Naruto shot a glare at Sasuke. We are, sensei. Then what are you doing here so far from your area of operations? The retired Hokage asked pointedly. I had a meeting with Danzo and I learned a few things that brought me here, sensei, Sasuke replied. Sarutobi nodded thoughtfully. Tell me what happened during the meeting. Sasuke narrated his tale including what he'd done to Naruto. Sarutobi listened silently through the whole narration and frowned his disapproval when Sasuke got to the part where he'd invaded Naruto's mind without his permission to confront Kyuubi. And you suspect that we lied to you? He asked at the end. Sasuke shook his head but looked unsure. No, I don't. Go on, spit it out, Sarutobi urged, seeing the teen hesitate. Well, either my family were innocent victims murdered by a madman or they were traitors. If the former, sensei, I'll honor them and hunt my brother down like a mad dog. If the latter, they are traitors. Incompetent ones at that, and they deserved what they got. Sarutobi nodded. Thing is, if they are traitors, then like Danzo said, my brother's a patriot and he's been dealt a shitty hand at life. And you're curious about your brother because even after what he did to you, you love him just as you hate him. Sasuke nodded. Very well. Sit, this is going to take a while, Sarutobi murmured. I'd rather that I never had to tell you or anyone else who wasn't in the compartment, but I'd also rather not have you go out snooping about one of Konoha's darkest secrets on your own volition. It's liable to get you and your team killed. So, as owner of the compartment, I'll grant you access. Remember that the knowledge of the incident is deep purple-coded, the highest level of classification for state and military secrets. What I tell you will not make it outside Team 7. I would say outside this room and ask Naruto to step out, but I know you'll share the details of our conversation on this subject with him and Sakura. Anyways, trapped as you are in Danzo's camp. And I'd rather not have the three of you executed for that offense. Is that clear? Yes, sensei, the boys echoed. Good. Itachi is a patriot of the highest caliber. The boy would have made a good successor for me if your clan's business hadn't ruined his life. You see, relations between your clan and the village had always been strained since Uchiha Madara went rogue and tried to get the whole clan to revolt. Why, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that relations were none too civil right from the founding of the village. You see, when Senju Hashirama convinced Uchiha Madara to join their clans together to build the first hidden village, something never before seen in the annals of the elemental nations, the latter agreed thinking that he'd be the first among equals. Too bad for him that Hashirama thought along the same lines himself, and unlike Madara, the Shodai had favorably viewed by many of the clans as well as the reigning daimyo of Hai no Kuni. So, instead of being appointed leader of this new village, your ancestor found himself a subject in it. A powerful one, but a subject nonetheless. Over the next few years, the egos of the two founding fathers clashed more and more often. The Shodai wanted to integrate the Uchiha into the village and most of the clan were willing, but Madara was adamant that the clan remain separate. The Shodai could not be swayed from this goal, and it's widely held in scholarly circles that Madara could not reconcile himself to being the servant of a man whom he considered his equal. Furthermore, the two of them could not agree on the fate of the Bijou. Between Hashirama and Madara, Konoha controlled all the tailed beasts. Madara wanted Konoha to hold them all to ensure our lasting supremacy, but the Shodai gave them away to the other villages in the interest of forging a lasting peace between the nations. Tensions between the two rose to the point that Madara became convinced that the village was no longer a good idea. But his arguments for independence lost against the promise of peace the Shodai gave his clansmen. They wanted an end to the endless conflict that had afflicted the world of ninja, and they believed Madara offered them a return to those dark times. At this point, In one of history's great ironies, the Shodai offered the Uchiha clan the right to live apart from the village, which had been the cause of his falling out with Madara, to preserve the peace. Unfortunately, the gulf between the two founding fathers had grown too much, and with his clan turning their back on him, Madara refused a compromise and went rogue. What followed was the Battle of Valley of the End, at the conclusion of which the histories would have us believe the Shodai killed Madara. But apparently, if your tale is to be believed, he's alive. Now, initially, the rest of the clans were okay with the Uchiha being treated as the first among equals, but slowly, as the village prospered and grew ever more powerful, voices of dissent arose from the ranks and file of the Nin Corps as well as the various clans. This strained relations between the village and your clan again, but not too much because the complaints were always few in number. And then came the Kyubi. Konoha was weakened by its attack. The Uchiha survived intact for the most part, and fearing for their security, the other clans wanted to weave them tightly into the fabric of the village. With a large number of backers for integration, the movement gained strength in official circles. Of course, your clan saw this as stepping on their traditional rights and resented the calls. In this climate, there was also the fear that the Kyubi was directed at Konoha for the same reasons Danzo stated in your conversation. So, when your clan argued vociferously against integrating into the village, the other clans began to think that perhaps there was credence to those unfounded suspicions about the Kyubi's attack, after all. As time passed, relations continued to fray, though as far as we have ever been able to verify, only the Uchiha had plans for taking up arms. In this milieu, Fugaku, your father, sent Itachi to infiltrate Anbu as an informer, even though Itachi opposed plans for armed rebellion against the village. Itachi did not come to us until the very last stages of your father's plot. If he had, perhaps I could have talked to Fugaku and made him see reason. But at that point, when Itachi reported to us after realizing your clan was committed to arms and could not be swayed, it was too late. We did not have the forces to fight your clan and then defend ourselves against the carrion eaters from Kyumo or Iwa who'd have descended upon us, sensing weakness in the aftermath. I was the only one in the ruling four who thought that a compromise was still possible, but the other three within the village and the daimyo outvoted me. The decision was taken to execute your clan with a first strike, and your brother volunteered for it, though the decision must have cost him dearly. He did it out of a sense of honor. It behooved upon him as the heir to deal with his errant relatives and reclaim lost face and honor, as well as to save the village. It would have sown a climate of fear and distrust amongst the other clans over their own fate if it ever came to light that Konoha ordered the execution of the Uchiha. Such an environment would have destroyed the village in the long run, of course, and we wanted to avoid it at all costs. With this goal in mind, Itachi volunteered to fake madness so that suspicion would never fall on the council and on me. On that fateful night, Sasuke, he was under orders to kill everything inside your clan compound, down to the cats and dogs. Itachi followed that order to a T, but for a single lapse. He spared you. And before he fled the walls of the village, he sought one last audience with me and asked me to not let the actions of your people cloud my opinion of you and to protect you. He was very particular on the last point, in fact, going so far as to threaten the lives of the other three members of the ruling four with their lives should an unfortunate accident befall you. What more proof do you require that your brother loved you dearly? Of course, I'd be the first to admit that he had a strange way of showing his love. We never understood why he tortured you the way he did. You'd have hunted him down anyway to redeem the clan's honor at falling victim to a single assassin without him ever resorting to that crude technique. That's one of two mysteries about that day, anyways. Thank you for your explanation, Sarutobi Sensei. I'm deeply in your debt, Sasuke replied solemnly. Sarutobi nodded. Now, what's this about Madara and the Kyubi? Are you telling me that our suspicions about the Nine Tails' motivations weren't baseless and that Madara is actually alive? He asked. It would appear so, Sasuke replied. The Kyubi confirmed it. Maybe, the retired Hokage said thoughtfully. Sarutobi didn't sound so sure he believed it, but then, he didn't know just how well Sasuke could control the beast. Team 7 had never shared that secret with anyone else. All that even Jiraiya knew of Sasuke's abilities was that he could use his Jujutsu to force the Kyuubi's chakra back. You said there are two mysteries about the day Itachi executed my clan, sensei. What's the other? Sasuke asked, switching topics. Oh, the forensics evidence was clear that he didn't do it alone. He had someone else helping him. We've never found out who, though. Sasuke nodded. What about Danzo, sensei? Pretend you're interested for now, all three of you, and put this out of your minds now that you've informed us, your superiors. The situation will be handled, Sarutobi replied. Sasuke nodded again and rose from his seat. Naruto mirrored him. Thank you for this audience, sensei. You're welcome, Sasuke. You two take care of yourselves, you hear? Yes, sensei. After the boys left, Sarutobi turned to his papers and began composing a new letter. This one addressed to both the daimyo and the Godame Hokage. It was clear that Danzo's overweening ambitions had finally grown to the level where he'd lost whatever modicum of common sense he'd ever had. There were plenty of dark secrets in Konoha's closet other than the Uchiha clan execution, and it was clear he could no longer be trusted to keep them. The very nature of the secrets was such that they'd turn friends into enemies and break alliances, and the security in this area could not be compromised. It was time to bury Danzo. Naruto and Sasuke weren't surprised to see that neither Hinata nor Shino were around on their return. What's happening, Naruto? The Team 7 medic and ambush specialist asked. Security, he asked. I rigged the room for light and sound just now. It should be good for a quarter of an hour, probably. Danzo tried to suborn me with a revelation about my family, Sasuke told her. I had to confirm it. But why did you use the Sharingan on Naruto? The Kunoichi asked. Because it's been a while since I busted his bones and he misses it, Naruto replied touchily. He was going to extract his pound in flesh for that offense from Sasuke when the time was right. Shooting a glare at his errant teammate, he said, Don't think that I'm going to let you off the hook because of today's revelations. Sasuke grimaced. I know I screwed up, Naruto. Damn right, you did. Sasuke ignored him and turned to his teammate. I'll tell you all the details later after we get out of this snake's pit, but for now, suffice to say that the rumors of the death of my ancestor, Uchiha Madara, one of the founding fathers of our village, were exaggerated and he was responsible for the Kyuubi's attack. Moreover, it turns out that my clan was executed for planning a coup against the village. My brother carried out the execution. Sakura blinked. And Danzo told you this to win you over, she asked. More or less. We have individual confirmation of both the Kyuubi attack and my clan's fate from Naruto's permanent and quite ungrateful guest as well as the Sandaime. That gave Sakura pause as she thought over the proper course of action. She did not find any, so she turned to her teammate for action. You think we ought to go missing, Nin? She asked, sliding into a chair facing her teammates. Do we, Sasuke? Naruto asked, making eye contact with his friend. It's your decision on this matter. Don't be dumb, you two. We aren't leaving. Konoha's our village and I'm not going to dishonor my ancestors again by trying to betray it like my relatives did. Then we better start sucking up to Danzo right now. It'd be advisable to start slow and accelerate on the ass-kissing as we go, for something tells me that a wrong step on our part is liable to earn us a poisoned meal, a slit throat, a garrote neck or a dagger in the back, Naruto opined, heaving a little sigh of relief. He knew he'd have left the village without so much as a backwards glance if that was what Sasuke wanted, as would have Sakura, but it'd have made for some awkwardness in the future. That's for the immediate present, Sakura agreed. What of the future? I have to establish correspondence with my brother somehow. That's going to be a bitch, seeing as how we don't even know where he is or what he's been doing all these years. You going to spare him? Naruto asked. No, Itachi wants to die for some reason. There's no other reason I can think of for why he gave me his instructions on that night. It's probably because he wants to be killed like a dog for his sins against our clan. Of course, I'm not going to treat him like that. Not when I know the truth now. But I will help him commit seppuku as atonement. Either on the battlefield or off it. It is my duty as his second. And after that? You. Heard the Sandaime, Naruto. My clan wouldn't have died without the Kyuubi attack creating so much distrust and feeding the turmoil between my clan and the others. Simmering tensions aggravated to the point of no return after its assault. Never mind that Madara is guilty of attempting to wipe out the village and my clan when he controlled the Nine Tails so. As such, it's my responsibility to deal with the rogue. Naruto chuckled at Sasuke's words. That's a relief, the blonde piped to his teammates, cheerily. I was afraid for a second there that Sasuke's plans have changed. That'd have been like the end of the world or something. They have, you idiot, Sasuke growled, swatting at the blonde. No, they haven't. The basic premise is still the same, hunt mass murdering relative and kill same. I swear I'm going to strangle you in your sleep one day, Naruto. Sasuke retorted hotly. Sakura guffawed at that. Sure, they were going up against someone who had enough power to rival the Shodai 60-odd years back, and it was certain as sunrise that the man had grown more powerful over the years, but all was well within her family and that alone mattered. Her family was united and that, certainly, was more than enough. Are the troops ready? The Yondaime Kazekage asked his ANBU staff. Yes, Kazekage-sama, the faceless ANBU commander whispered. The Kazekage stared down at the 500 ANBU, Jounin, Chunin and even Genin illuminated by numerous torches and arrayed into neat ranks on the ground below. This was all the Nin Suna could assemble on such short notice, and he was going to throw them at Danzo's camp. By sunset the day after tomorrow, many of his shinobi would be dead, but then, so would Danzo's camp down to the last rat. In the Yondaime's considered opinion, that was a fair enough price for the blood of these heroes. Brave shinobi of Sunagakure, the Kazekage spoke, the people of Kaze no Kuni have toiled under the yoke of Fire Country for over 3 years now. In that time, the Fire Ninja have raped and killed, and looted and pillaged with impunity, taking advantage of our weakened state to prey on us. That time comes to an end today. We're no longer weakened. The hidden village in sand is strong. The land of wind is strong. We have righteousness and justice on our side. And we will emerge triumphant. Today, you're assembled to avenge the spilled blood of your family members and your countrymen. You will work in concert with the samurai units surrounding that worm Danzo and his coterie, and you will reduce his fortress back to the dust from which it rose. You will crush those vermin and leave no stone unturned hunting down those thieves and murderers. Abide not a rat to live within those walls. Danzo-sama, the masked Nin said in metronome, as he knelt on the floor. What do you have to report on our young Uchiha and his friends? Danzo asked, picking up a glass of water. Their tent was rigged for light and sound twice. After his meeting. For a stretch of about 15 minutes both times. The second time, the survivors of Team 8 attached to their unit weren't in the tent. And what are they doing now? They've put a rotating watch and turned in for the night. What were they doing when the screens went down? Danzo asked curiously. They were carrying on ribbing each other as usual. Danzo nodded. The fact that they used the screen told him they were aware of being observed or at least conscientious enough of security to act as if nothing had happened. He reflected that on hindsight, it might have been better to use Shursui's gift on Sasuke during their meeting, but the risk of using the eye against a Sharingan prodigy hadn't seemed worth the reward then. Maybe he should have. Anyways, he'd observe the 3 Nin tomorrow before deciding what to do about Team 7. Well, kiddies, Jiraiya said jovially, here we are. Several members of his temporary command recently emerged from the belly of toads looked grossed out, remembering their journey up and down the throats of the critters. The Sannin ignored them. That right there is the grass-fire border, where loads of fun awaits us fine adventurers. So does much booze and cuz, he crooned gaily. Yeah, lucky for us you brought us here to face two bijou, someone commented sourly from the back. Hey, don't be so down, retorted another wise ass in the darkness. You ask me, fighting Jinchuriki is a definite improvement over being regurgitated as toad puke. Others assented vociferously at that statement. The whole generation's made of ungrateful brats, Jiraiya groused half-heartedly while he stared intently towards grass country. It's probably that brat Naruto's fault. The first unit of the IWA Grass Alliance crossed into the High no Kuni border at 4 in the morning the same day. They encountered no resistance as Mukai's troops were sound asleep in their barracks. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.